Creative Nonfiction, Quarter 1, Module 1, Introduction to Literary Genres, a facilitation of the module designed for the program. According to Leo Gottkind, creative nonfiction heightens the whole concept of essay writing. It allows a writer to employ the diligence of a reporter, the shifting voices and viewpoints of a novelist, the refined wordplay of a poet, and the analytical modes of an essayist. Caroline Force and Philip Gerard states that the literariness of creative nonfiction distinguishes it from deadline reportage, daily journalism, academic criticism, and critical biography. It is storytelling of a very high order through the revelation of character and the suspense of plot, the subtle braiding of themes and resonance, memory and imaginative research, precise and original language. This definition certainly makes creative nonfiction the most exciting and the most widespread genre in the literary world today. Example: on July 15, River Maya will have a concert at the Araneta Coliseum. The band has just arrived from a successful tour in China and Indonesia. Tickets for the concert are selling quickly. Ordinary news. While the said news is factual and true, it appears dull and lacks interesting details. By using the genre of creative nonfiction, this news can be transformed into a more interesting piece of information. Fans of Philippine musical band River Maya are in for a real thrill. On July 15, their idol, fresh from their sold-out tour in China and Indonesia, will be at the Araneta Coliseum for a single concert. Marie Andrada, 18, a communication arts major in USD, says this one concert she would rather die for than miss. Judging from tickets sales so far, at least 10,000 other people agree with her. Because of the addition of some fascinating details, the second example is a more interesting paragraph than the first. Another example is given below. Example 1. Now that we understand more about global warming, we need to make our children realize how important it is for them to do their part in protecting the environment. Examples are saving electricity and water, using paper bags, and recycling paper. Example 2. Global warming is a reality and it is here. Now that we have finally understood this, we have no more excuses for inaction. Let us begin with our children. Let us make them aware that the environment is also their responsibility. The two examples above are illustrations of creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction refers to the use of literary craft in the writing of nonfiction to produce factually accurate essays or narrative about actual events and people in a compelling and interesting way. According to Leo Gottkind, a text can be classified as creative nonfiction when the writer communicates information just like a reporter, but shaped in a way that reads like fiction. Lesson 1: Understanding the genres of fiction and drama. Fiction is defined as a series of imagined facts which illustrates truths about human life. It is commonly called stories and can either be short or short story, or rather long novella, or novel. Drama also uses the traditional convention of fiction but has an additional distinctive characteristics of being performed and mounted on stage. Comparison and contrast of the conventions and devices between fiction and drama. Fiction is generally classified as a short story or novel. Short story, a brief artistic prose form that centers on a single main incident and intends to produce a single dominant impression. Novel, an extensive prose or narratives that contains chapters and interludes. Plays, drama, however, are generally classified into acts or major divisions. One act play has one unit of time, one unit of action, and play. Three-act play showcases a longer exposition of the theme and conflict. All stories must have a point of view. Point of view is the vantage point or the angle from which the readers can see how the story unfolds. It can be told from the perspective of a narrator, a main supporting character, or an observer. It can also come from an omniscient, all-knowing being. Drama also employs point of view, but this is not apparent and evident in a play. What is visible is the interplay of dialogue between and among the characters. This is the component that moves the action of the play. A dialogue is what the viewers see and hear in a performance, and these are the words uttered by the characters in a dramatic play. The development of plot in both fiction and drama has a pattern. Generally, it contains the following: exposition, introduce the characters and dramatic situation of the story or play. Rising action, introduces the conflict of the story or play. Climax, introduces the central movement of crisis that defines the conflict. Resolution, denouement, introduces the moment of insight, discovery, or revelation of the character after the falling action. More popular and modern types of fiction and drama divides the plot into three general parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. Narrative devices. Foreshadowing, used in fiction and drama as a guide or hint at what is to happen next in the story. Irony is also used both in fiction and drama when words that are uttered either by the author or characters in the story are opposite of what they really mean. The intention here is to present a difference between what is imagined will happen and what actually happens. Flashback is employed by the author or playwright through the use of past events that will help the readers understand the present. This is generally utilized to achieve a dramatic effect or impact on the readers and audience. A conflict is both present in fiction and drama. It provides and showcases the opposing objectives of the protagonist and the antagonist, or inside the protagonist. The use of deus ex machina in both fiction and drama was once a noble strategy. Today it is a sign of weakness in the written work. Lesson 2: Understanding the genre of poetry. The language of poetry is quite different from the language of prose, fiction, and drama. Poetry uses a more intensified, focused, and intricate language than prose. In ancient times and periods, poetry was the language of people, so poetry was developed way before prose did. Poetry is always characterized according to the following: poetry attempts to achieve beauty. Poetry is imaginative or makes use of strength of imagination. Poetry is musical, melodic, and rhythmical. Poetry makes the use of language that is metaphorical or symbolic, not direct. Poetry is more concentrated than prose. Poetry makes use of brevity and conciseness. Poetry is categorized into different forms from the ancient epic to the specific limerick, but generally there are about three major categories of poetry: narrative, lyric, and dramatic. Narrative poems, short and simple, while others are long and complex. Epics like Iliad, ballads like Lord Randall, and prose poems like the metrical romance of King Arthur fall under this category. Dramatic poems employ dramatic form or elements of dramatic technique, such as dialogues or characters, instead of just a single speaker or persona. Eliot's The Long Song of J. Alfred Prufrock is a typical example of this. Lyric poems, brief in structure and subjective in expressing the thoughts and emotions of the persona, the speaker of the poem. Originally written to be sung to the accompaniment of a lyre, hence the term. The words in these poems could be lyrics, which are strongly melodic, songs, sonnets, haikus, odes, elegies, and pastoral poems are examples of this. Understanding the elements and conventions of poetry. Since poetry makes use of intensified and exalted language, its elements are quite different from plays and stories. Imagery. The use of images in a constant in poetry. It is the essential representation of an experience or object that is perceived through the sense. It is presented in language in a way that we can see, smell, hear, taste, touch, or feel as our imagination allows. Figurative language. Figures of speech are devices that help beautify or make the language more poetic than it already is. The most commonly used figures of speech are simile, metaphor, personification, and onomatopoeia. Sound. Poetry is as much an oral as it is visual form, therefore, it is meant to be recited and read aloud. A poem should be read aloud to reveal its true merits. The rhyme scheme and the meter that a poem employs add to the sound of the poem. Persona. The speaker of the poem is not necessarily the poet. In many cases, poets create a persona, a word that comes from Latin, which means mask, who speaks the poem in the first person. Since the poem does not have characters, it is the persona and his or her perspective where we are able to perceive his or her experience. Lesson 3. Using elements as techniques to develop themes. The theme refers to the central idea, the thesis, the message a story conveys, or a generalization or an abstraction from it. Theme is not necessarily the moral or message of the story. It may be simply what the story is all about. An article co authored by Grant Faulkner 2020 states that a theme in writing is the underlying idea behind an article or story that unifies its words into a coherent whole. The theme has been called the muscle or the vehicle of a story. A theme can be stated in one of two ways. It can be made explicitly, usually in business correspondence, technical writing, and editorials. It can also be made implicitly, usually in short stories, novels, and movie scripts. In this case, the theme often emerges as the moral of the story. A strong, well defined theme enables the reader to see the deeper meaning in your story and the intention behind your own motivation for writing it, while the structure and purpose